This is your Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell, reporting on this final Sunday of 2019, where we start off by looking back at what was a momentous first year under a rookie Democratic governor, J.B. Pritzker.
I, J.B. Pritzker,
do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
Billionaire J.B. Pritzker spent a record $171 million to win his office. And once he took that office, he kept spending, dipping into his personal wealth to double the salaries of key staffers.
Some of your critics in the campaign say that you bought the governor's race. Have you now bought the office and the people who work in it?
Well, I think the question is wrong.
The question is about loyalty. In the example of Governor Blagojevich, it was two of his own deputy governors who came forward as whistleblowers when they saw wrongdoing. And I think there is a real question about whether or not they would have been tempted to stay silent if they were in Blago's pocket.
Well, everybody that I have brought into my administration hits a very high ethical standard.
As Pritzker geared up to take the reins of the administration, his predecessor, Bruce Rauner, prepared for his exit. The one-term Republican insisted that despite his failure to complete his turnaround agenda, it remained popular with voters.
Virtually everything that we've recommended is supported by a significant majority of the people of Illinois. Maybe not by some of the elected officials or the heads of the special interest groups that have an economic agenda in those items, but by the people themselves. They're supported.
As Rauner left, his arch rival, House Speaker Michael Madigan, gloated.
Over the last 4 years, why all of us as members of the legislature have been involved in an epic struggle with the executive department.
And Governor Pritzker promised a reset.
We lost 4 valuable years because of an ideological battle. That stops now.
And Pritzker set his sights squarely on his biggest campaign promise, a progressive income tax.
A fair tax will change the arc of Illinois' finances forever.
Governor J.B. Pritzker's first budget proposal banks heavily on his campaign promise to pass a progressive income tax. But that remains at least 2 years away, and it's no guarantee.
Until then, this proposed budget serves as a bridge to a stable fiscal future.
The new governor also promoted popular ideas that enjoy broad support in both parties.
This budget also includes the legalization and taxation of sports betting.
And he didn't wait to take big leaps in economic policy, passing a $15 minimum wage a little over a month after he was sworn in.
It's been 9 long years since workers got a raise, and even 9 years ago, that raise amounted to 25 cents.
Governor J.B. Pritzker declared a historic political victory just 33 days into office, signing a bill to gradually raise the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, reaching that peak in 2025.
The nation's war on drugs discriminated against people of color. What we're presenting here is nothing short of historic.
Some of the loudest critics of legalization came from within Pritzker's own party.
You know you can buy 30 grams now. At 6 o'clock, you go back 7 o'clock, buy another 30 grams. Tomorrow, you can buy another 30 grams. Come on. They're creating a whole new world of drug dealers.
We need to ensure that it's not a small group of people getting very rich. We want to make a lot of new business leaders in this state through this process.
With a special focus on creating jobs and opportunity in minority communities, in part to repair the harms of history.
The nation's war on drugs discriminated against people of color.
Despite fairly equal usage rates, blacks are over 3.5 times more likely than whites to be arrested for cannabis. Today, we say no more.
Within days of moving to legalize recreational marijuana, the Illinois House and Senate also passed the Reproductive Health Act, expanding access, funding, and legal protection for abortion in Illinois.
Abortion bans don't ban abortion. They just endanger women.
Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Reproductive Health Act into law Wednesday morning, pushing the state farther left when others are moving right.
Women's rights in Illinois do not hinge on the fate of Roe v. Wade or the whims of an increasingly conservative Supreme Court in Washington. And in Illinois, we guarantee as a fundamental right a woman's right to choose.
Religious conservatives protested the controversial measure in the State House, in the streets, and in the courts.
What happened today was the legalized killing of viable, preemie babies in utero.
We a viability standard in the law, and federal law with regard to abortion late in pregnancy reigns supreme. So there is nothing in this law that will make that scenario possible.
But the governor did find bipartisan support for a plan to raise $45 billion to fund infrastructure and construction projects.
At press events in Chicago, in Rockford, and in Waukegan, Governor Pritzker marketed the potential of his $45 billion capital infrastructure plan.
Frankly, it's all in the name, Rebuild Illinois. And it's all in the name of this plan, and that's Rebuild Illinois. Rebuild Illinois.
In a state where bridges buckle and potholes abound, drivers are all too familiar with the steep cost of getting around.
And as a result of the neglect, the people of Illinois have been paying an enormous price.
Pritzker predicts if taxpayers don't pitch in more at the pump now, we'll wind up paying in other ways, like traffic jams and car repairs. The governor says the state can really use the extra tax money
to repair what's broken and build what's needed.
That does come with a price tag. Double the gas tax from 19 cents a gallon up to 38 cents. That money does go into a lockbox, too. Lawmakers only allowed to use it on transportation projects.
Senate Republican leader Bill Brady floated the idea of raising the motor fuel tax early on in the 2019 legislative session, giving oxygen to an idea Senate Democrat Martin Sandoval had promoted for years.
Listen, we're tired of the potholes. We're tired of the congestion.
Right.
We're tired of our slow trains.
One of the reasons I'll be voting yes is the constitutional amendment that ensures a lockbox, that these resources will go into that system and won't be swept into other programs as we've seen over the last several years.
Listen, if you're going to use the roads, you should pay. If you're going to use the roads, you should pay your fair share.
There's also this promise of a South Suburban airport. Are you supportive of this plan, and why is it necessary?
Yes, I support that.
House Republicans from that part of the state dissed a third Chicago airport as a waste of money.
The state can't afford to build a third airport. The people in my district, which includes Peatone, are adamantly opposed to the airport there. They want to maintain their agricultural way of life. It is not something that the people of the area want at all.
3 months later, the FBI showed up at Senator Sandoval's offices in Springfield, Cicero, and his home in Chicago.
Anything you can tell us about what you're doing here?
Federal agents said very little to explain their raid at State Senator Martin Sandoval's home in Chicago, his district office in Cicero, and his state house office in Springfield. But what they held in their hands did most of the talking for them. FBI agents carried computers, hard drives, monitors, documents, and other evidence out in bags and hard containers. In our inauguration interview with Governor Pritzker, he suggested that raising the gas tax wasn't Senator Bill Brady's only idea.
Where are you on raising the gas tax?
Well, actually, Senator Brady proposed another idea that I think is a pretty good one, and that's, we might be able to expand gaming in the state and have that as one of the sources of revenue to pay for a capital bill. This session, we legalized sports betting and expanded gaming, leading the Midwest in a new industry and setting us up to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for our state.
Brady took fire from within his own caucus after he revealed he had a conflict of interest. Brady is paid as a salesman to close deals at bars to install video gaming terminals, a business licensed and regulated by the state.
You shouldn't be in public office in a part-time job and begin making tremendous amounts of money in lines of work you just kind of fall into. Certain legislators are making a lot of money from industries where they have a tremendous amount of influence, and I think that the more the average voter in Illinois paid attention, the more shocked they'd be about what's going on in Springfield.
The governor's new capital infrastructure plan relies heavily on gaming, including the state opening 6 new casinos.
We've authorized a casino license right here in Waukegan. We've authorized a casino license for the city of Rockford. We've authorized a casino license for Walker's Bluff Resort expansion.
But overeager politicians looking to cash in on gaming got caught up in a federal corruption scandal.
Prosecutors charged House Democrat Luis Arroyo in a corruption case in federal court Monday morning. Charging documents show the state lawmaker from Chicago bribed a state senator to pass a law to expand sweepstakes in Illinois.
Illinois utility company Exelon faces a class action lawsuit after federal investigators started examining its lobbying activities in Springfield. Investors allege Exelon kept important information from them about ongoing criminal investigations. In financial documents, Exelon admits the FBI and SEC filed subpoenas to seek information related to Senator Martin Sandoval and House Speaker Michael Madigan after several of Madigan's top aides landed lucrative lobbying jobs with the power company.
So we're going to recommend anyone to work for ComEd or Exelon. Do you ever refer someone? No, I'm not a target of anything.
Governor Pritzker himself also came under federal scrutiny in 2019. Federal prosecutors opened an investigation into his property tax breaks at his Gold Coast mansion. A report from the Cook County Watchdog found Pritzker engaged in a, quote, scheme to defraud taxpayers when he and his wife had his toilets disconnected. That move allowed the Cook County assessor to revalue their property, saving them north of $300,000 in taxes.
Do you have any concern there could be criminal charges coming out of this whatsoever?
No concerns at all. As I say, any review of this will show that all the rules are followed.
Fiscal conservatives hope the mounting ethical and criminal scandals in the state build up enough voter angst the public won't back Pritzker's progressive tax at the ballot box in 2020. Abolishing the state's flat tax so he could raise taxes on the rich was Pritzker's top campaign item. Lawmakers and the public got a look at the new proposed tax rates earlier this year.
If you make $250,000 or less, your whole household, the governor says you'd get a tax cut. But how much? Barely any at all. It really amounts to about $5 a week for most people in Illinois.
Governor, you promised the middle class and people striving to get their significant tax relief. This is the relief? $5 a week?
Hundreds of dollars for many families across the state of Illinois is real relief. And remember, we're also accomplishing something incredibly important for the state, which is by stabilizing our state and the state's finances, we're giving people an opportunity to start businesses, to grow businesses, and for companies all over the world to choose to come to Illinois because they'll have certainty.
When we come back, we talk to Democratic Senator Andy Manar about the biggest political battle on the horizon in 2020, the push for a progressive income tax.